And now we finally have Jill Eisenberg, a longtime collaborator with us. She's going to be doing a session now called Teach to Reach, Creating a Dynamic and Diverse Classroom Library. She's joining us from New York City, where Jill is Vice President of Business Development, Curriculum, and Literacy Strategy at Lee & Low Books, the largest independent children's book publisher specializing in diversity and multiculturalism. For nearly a decade now, she has overseen strategic partnerships, provides product and literacy expertise to schools, districts, and literacy organizations. Jill, welcome.
Before we kind of dive into taking a look at how to really bolster classroom libraries that you have, I want to acknowledge, the state of children's publishing right now, very, very briefly here in a nutshell, but progress has been made around diversifying children's literature. The CCBC has been tracking most in-depth race and ethnicity, but they have also been looking at other parts of children's books and looking at identities represented in those. But as you can see over the past, 20 years or almost 30 years, that there has been slow progress across the industry in children's books to diversify who is telling the story and what characters, historical figures are being centered. But it is important to note that when you look at the methodology of how these books are being tracked, the progress is not even. Certain groups are still much more underrepresented than others. Even the definition of a book being categorized as diverse or around race and ethnicity, for example, will factor in secondary characters, will factor in folk tales. So it is still very challenging out there for educators, nonprofit leaders, librarians to find contemporary stories of our kids being kids and grappling with issues of today. And then in addition to the progress being made within genres is uneven. When we look at current realistic fiction is doing better than fantasy or board books or mystery. So really thinking about what parts of our students and in what levels and what genres and formats are being represented. So when we also then think about, for the state of school budgets, many schools do not have the ability to get the newest releases to see where the most progress has been made. And so looking at books that are coming out in 2003 and 2014, that it can still be challenging and overwhelming for caregivers and educators to find books that they are looking for their students. But they are out there. I mean, as Wilma has shown in terms of highlighting her and her colleagues' favorites, as well as I saw Ariana listing ILCTR's book list in the chat as well, that there are great entities out there helping really surface these high quality books that can give you a jumpstart, can really help you bolster your library. I want to open or continue the conversation with pausing for a poem from the Amazing Faces poetry anthology, edited by Lee Bennett Hopkins. This is a poem written by Jane Medina called Me Times Two. I'm going to read the English here. I read times two, I write times two, I think, I dream, I cry times two, I laugh times two, I'm right times two, I sing, I ask, I try times two, I do twice as much as most people do because most speak one, but I speak two. What I love and what many of my staff at Lee & Low love about this poem is that it really encapsulates not only the mission that we have at Lee & Low, but as what Wilma said at the end of her presentation, that there is room for everyone, really making a space through children's books and in our classrooms of recognizing our children's identities, all aspects of it as an asset, not something to be hidden or left at the door, but how do we welcome it, whether we're starting with their name, whether they're starting with other parts of what they are bringing to us each and every day. And so that is something that we really strive to create and fostering those conversations through kids' books. We hope that, the mindset here is to not take the existing libraries or collections that you're using, whether mentor text or classroom libraries, and light them on fire and feel like you have to start over. Many of the books that you have are doing well and have good purpose in your classrooms, but thinking about how can you continue to build out and enhance and deepen your libraries or your mentor text or part of your curriculum to really create high quality, culturally diverse collections. So first and foremost, it does not matter what is on the cover, who is on the cover, what's in the book, who's in the book. if the texts do not engage students. So even here at Leland, when we talk about when we're pushing people to think about how we build beautiful collections of books to put in front of our kids, elementary through high school, that these books, these stories need to transform students, that they need to resonate with kids. They're going to get to sit up and they're going to lean in. And in addition to that, then we get to that level of where we can make sure that we're representing a variety of demographics and social identity markers, as well as the intersectionality of those, making sure that a range of experiences within a group or culture is represented, showing kids who are Black and African American living in Houston versus in Washington Heights versus in St. Louis, showing a variety of family structures. And then also, again, making sure that these stories and communities and author diversity is diverse across your genres and your formats. So a lot of different places to kind of think about how we build that collection. Of all of the slides, I want to hope that you walk away with, this is my personal favorite slide in terms of just the book audit tools, really trying to think of, when you are evaluating whether it's one book, a collection of books, or a whole curriculum with your colleagues or your administrators, that there are tools out there from really wonderful organizations who have really tried to help build very thoughtful ways to kind of help think about, not to have to do this for every single book in your library, but once you've done it or had your colleagues or even parent volunteers do it a couple times on individual titles, that format you'll have that imprinted, and you'll be thinking about that as you approach each book, as you're considering it. Is this a book worth adding to the mentor text list? Is this a book I want to bring into small group instruction? So if you are looking at evaluating the cultural responsiveness of a whole curriculum, as districts are tasked with figuring out what programs they want to continue using, NYU has a really wonderful culture responsive curriculum scorecard in English and in Spanish. Here at Lee and Low, in English and Spanish, we have one around looking at a classroom library questionnaire, really designed for educators, separate from public libraries and things like that. And then at the individual book level, Learning for Justice, Achieve the Core, and then the American Indian Museum through the Smithsonian have great specific tools on how to evaluate individual titles. If you're trying to figure out, is this accurate? What is the purpose I'm going to do with this book? Is this the best book I want to use for my lesson? So please consider using those tools. I also found a really great tool recently, specifically around evaluating AAPI children's books through the Very Asian Foundation. So that's another tool that I now need to update here as well. So again, looking at in terms of how we think about building that diverse bookshelf, that collection, whether it's your mentor text, whether it's small group instruction books or your classroom library, really being thoughtful about where do you want your students' identities, where do we want these conversations around immigration and migration to factor into the lessons and into the discussion. So when you look at the types of books that you might be considering, you're going to have books that you're going to want to be pulling out our similarities and differences. This is what we all eat for lunch around the world. This is, how I get to school. There's also going to be times where you're going to want to select books where it's more universal everyday topics, but the protagonist will have diverse backgrounds and that won't be at the forefront of the story that will be part of the lesson, but you're showing a rich fabric of who is in our community and who's in our country and who's in the classroom. But then there's going to be times where you are specifically going to seek out books to specifically highlight, explore, and celebrate heritage, cultures, identities, whether that's through holidays, foods, festivals, and topics like that. But then also thinking about the next piece too of where do we want the role of history, the contributions in communities of color and other underrepresented groups, where does that fit? How do we show the complexity of oppression, racism, discrimination, and the tackling and overcoming of these throughout U.S. history and global history. But then to make sure that as we continue to push that we're also showcasing and centering joy. How do we center joy with for children of color as well as families of color, as communities of color, making sure that that is also part of how we're displaying what books are on our shelves. Just going to jump ahead a little bit. One piece that we do want to emphasize is really showing the diversity of experiences within a culture community. So particularly with today's topic around migration and immigration, which communities are we are dominating your collection around immigration and migration, as well as what historical period are you covering, who's in your community versus who are in other parts of the United States or around the world that you want to look at. And then even within a community, making sure that those are not the only stories that are being told about family. So, for example, if you have an umbrella term or group of you're trying to increase your collection around Latinx, Latino or Hispanic stories, how do you show rich experiences and stories set in the early 1920s up through modern day today? We've got families, Ana Maria Reyes, who is living in Washington Heights, New York, versus Still Dreaming, where the family is being repatriated back to Mexico during the 1920s. Different pieces of stories so we can show just the richness, the nuance, the complexity within communities and cultures. This in terms of, really talking about the intersectionality of our students, when we think about here at Lee and Low, even with our own mission back in the 90s, our focus was around addressing the gaps that we saw around race and ethnicity, but knowing that we cannot stop there. We need to factor in what languages are we presenting in the classroom, especially if your classrooms are going to have more than one language spoken. You're going to have many multilingual learners, and what their needs and their families' needs will be. How do we present family structure and configuration, and even abilities and neurological diversity? When you look at, sometimes books will still have only disability books that are collections around disabilities may still largely skew white, and so how do we make sure that we're also factoring in other parts of our students' lives that are more rich and accurate of what's going on in our school districts? I want to give some examples in terms of what we think about teachers are doing and communities are doing around the country of how they're infusing diverse books. So one of the examples I'd love to share was a story walk that we saw in Maine at a local farmers market. The public library actually teamed up with the farmers market to move the farmers market closer to the library for an event where they took this book, Rainbow Stew, that shows three siblings who they get rained out from their plans, and their grandfather has this great idea of let's go into the garden and we're going to harvest a bunch of vegetables and we'll make a vegetable soup. And it's how they had a wonderful chance to kind of make lemonade out of lemons. But with this story, the children and their families would read through physical panels that the library had scanned of the book. And at the end of the story, you end in the farmer's market. And what was so special about that is, you're going to read words like eggplant and zucchini and tomato, and to really help, build that schema for students on what that means and allow them to come to go and see that and have that and then get to do activities with it. And also to show the role that caregivers play, the role that the food market, our librarians and our teachers play, that all of these adults, all of these caregivers are invested in our kids' education. This example too, in terms of looking at in the Bronx in New York, a principal had selected a book of the month where they were doing a bilingual text. And one of the books that they had chosen was My Very Own Room, that talks about a little girl frustrated that she can't get space in her family's home. And her mom kind of brainstorms with her how to carve out space amongst lots of siblings. And what was so special about this was just the energy and enthusiasm that the parent volunteers had around this book and the books that the principal had selected, who were very thoughtful of what is going to resonate with kids. And the parents had gone and recreated the house with Legos and paper pillows and had these on display when you enter the building. And to just show that these books are resonating not just with the kids, but with the adults as well. And that, again, this is a community event that the adults, the educators, the principals, the administrators, the teachers, and the parents are all thinking about what books are going to make our kids excited to be here. I do want to just jump in, so I'm really thoughtful on time. Here is a great example too at the middle school level, but this principal this educator for 7th grade selected Summer of the Mariposas, which is a modern day retelling of the Odyssey set in Mexico with 5 sisters. And she wanted to use this during pandemic virtual learning, to really still emphasize that the role that migration has is a universal thing for all creatures, and to really help change what are the assets of migration and immigration, and recognizing who her students were in North Carolina. And this was a book that, they ended up being able to create incredible partnerships with some schools in Mexico too, to really show that this is something that is experienced by all, and that it is something that is worth celebrating and exploring. As we get close in terms of, again, for screenshots, I want to emphasize that, there are amazing books out there. Wilma was sharing some of her favorites. Don't feel that you are stuck on, search engines trying to find these books. There are some wonderful leading award groups for every type of area of your students' lives that you want to find kids' books for. So the American Library Association, that link at the way top, has a list of all of these books that are looking at the diversity and accuracy of how these groups are portrayed in nonfiction and in literature and in poetry. So start there in terms of when you really want to be as strategic as possible of what you want to add to your classroom. Additionally, there are several great organizations out there who are curating lists specifically for groups. Kohler in Colorado, ALA's Rainbow List, ADL's Books Matter, the Very Asian Foundation's The May Book Project are wonderful jumping off points, whether you are looking for books specifically for migration, immigration, or for other multilingual learners, or for other parts of your students' lives. And then too, as well, like if you want to follow many communities around in the blog space still, along social media, teachers and librarians and parents who are having really robust, thoughtful, sensitive, rigorous conversations around what is the best of the best books, why, these books do matter, how to use them. So you're not starting from scratch of like, great, I bought this. What do I do with it? How to use these books to start with. And then also, We Need Diverse Books. They're doing a wonderful job in terms of making, if you have books that either are already required in your curriculum, but you really want to pair them, you come up with more contemporary, human-centered examples. They have a great roundup on their website as well. And then Reimagining Migration with their learning arc framework. I had a chance to do a couple years ago a really neat project with them where we looked at how they talk about where migration, immigration can fit in talking with students from all levels, elementary through high school, and where children's literature can really help emphasize that. So when you look at children's literature specifically through the lens of immigration, what part of the immigration and migration experience are you trying to emphasize in terms of how, what migration means, the historical context? And so that's another great tool that they have. I'm going to end in terms of my last slide here of why does this matter? Why work to find these books, add these to the collections, fight to get them alongside in your next mentor text or classroom library. One of the programs we have here at Lee and Low is a program called the New Voices Award, where we provide an opportunity for BIPOC writers who have not been published yet to submit and be considered for an award, where if they win, they get paired with an award-winning illustrator and then given a full Lee and Low contract. One of the books that came through that project was It Just Happened by Don Tate, about Bill Traylor, who was a former enslaved person and sharecropper, and then went on to become an artist in his 70s down in Alabama. This book, we had not seen his biography. We're thrilled to have it. And it was picked up by Reading is Fundamental, a nonprofit that was distributing multicultural libraries around the country, focused on STEAM. One of the schools that was selected was in Alabama. And this boy, Justin, in 2014, came across it and realized that this was actually his family story. This was his great-great-great-grandfather, Bill. And what was really particularly special about that when Reading is Fundamental shared that with us is just, to think about not only for Justin to see that his family story was in this book, but for Justin's classmates to see that Justin, who's just sitting next to me, his story is in the book, and thinking about, this is just one child, one family. What other stories have we yet to tell? So thank you. That was a lot. Fire hose, we know.